Hello, Garland Nixon here, and we're hanging out with Peter Erickson for Conversations Among the Ruins. We got some things to talk about. Let's talk. Well, I can't find my Duran hat, so I guess I will make do with a wrinkly old Dunkin' Donuts hat. But we got bigger fish to fry right now. We're talking with Peter Erickson, with he of the great YouTube channel Conversations Amongst the Ruins, with him and his son Charlie. Peter, welcome back. And we haven't been able to do our regular Fridays, but as you know, I was in Russia and Belarus and running all over creation. So I still don't have my feet back on the ground because I'm still moving until the 17th, 18th of December, but I had a good time.
What a pathetic excuse. But no, those are very good excuses. I'm sorry. I'm very glad to be here.
Yeah, you just got back from Russia. Did you ever get to get on the train that goes from Moscow to St. Petersburg?
Yeah, we did that last year, actually. Yeah, you can take, I think there's a high-speed train and then a more just an express train. We took the express, so it wasn't the fastest.
It was like 4 hours or something like that.
Yeah, that's what ours was too, I think.
Yeah. And it was a nice train.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I know. I've been on several train rides in Russia, and they've all been very nice, including an overnight train that we took from Nizhny Novgorod to Kazan. And my wife slept like a baby. I didn't sleep a wink, but it wasn't the fault of the train. I don't know. I was just had a cough.
Sometimes when you're in a different area, it's hard to sleep,
Yeah,
so
I'm that way. Yeah.
Well, I was in business class on that train, and man, it was first class of all first class. Business class wasn't all that expensive. I mean, considering you're in rubles, it was like what a normal train crossed here, right? Man, they served the finest of food. I felt like I was in a 5-star restaurant. And I'm like, wow, they're serving meals like this on a 4-hour trip. Like literally somebody walks by and they've got like a platter and they've got a grabber and they're taking off, putting hot towels for you to wipe your hands off with. And then they come by with a menu for you to. And I'm like, man, what are the trains getting? Are you kidding me?
Yeah. I never. Yeah, I never eat at restaurants like that in the U.S. because I can't afford them. But in Russia, we ate at some really top-notch restaurants and had some incredible meals, incredible service too. It's because you can afford it there. It's more expensive than it was a couple of years ago, I have to say, but it's still, much more reasonable than it is here.
It really is. It's great. Anyway, so let's talk about a couple of things. One of the things I want to touch base is there's a new national security strategy in there. Before we really get into it, it seems to me, and well, that is in the national security strategy. Why don't I do this? I'm going to look in there for the word Russia, right? And I find this. Listen to this. Let me read this. The lack of self-confidence is most evident in Europe's relationship with Russia. But now listen to this. European allies enjoy a significant hard power advantage over Russia by almost every measure. Okay, I know you got to put that in, but a hard power by almost every measure except tanks, artillery, number of soldiers, air defense, you know what I mean? Really, right. With the exception of everything related to military, they totally dominate, right? Let me see. European relations with Russia will require significant U.S. diplomatic engagement, both to reestablish conditions of strategic stability across the Eurasian landmass. Oh, yeah, like the U.S. has been working with that, and to mitigate the risk of conflict between Russia and European states. It is of core interest, right? It is a core interest of the United States to negotiate an expeditious cessation of hostilities. You notice this? cessation of hostilities.
Ah,
Marco Rubio must have wrote that.
yeah.
In order to stabilize European economies, prevent unintended escalation or expansion of the war, and reestablish strategic stability with Russia, as well as to enable the post-hostilities reconstruction of Ukraine to enable its survival as a viable state. Cessation of hostilities. Russia's already said they doing those cessations of hostilities. Either you address the core interest or not. So even when you read something that sounds like they're leaning in the right direction, there's still some neocon influence. Cessation of hostilities. That almost sounds like a, like a temporary ceasefire. Ain't happening. Anyway, your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I think you're right to point that out. They're not ready to really accept the Russian demands, but I think they're moving there very slowly, and it's because it's the reality. In spite of their claim that they have total dominance in hardware, in every department, it's just not true, and they know it. So that's why we're seeing this flurry of rather chaotic diplomatic activity right now. A new effort to find, to reach some kind of agreement, and it's all done with the under the really the guise of a mediating role. We're pretending that the U.S. is pretending that it's a third party. It doesn't. In the language of the that you just quoted to me too, it's the same sort of thing. It's like, yeah, Europe has got to bury the hatchet and whatever. What you forget to remember that we were the ones who really launched the war, and we initially the Europeans were kind of reluctant. If you go back, to like the early 2010s and whatever, I say, we were the ones who pushed them towards accepting, the NATO membership for Ukraine and so on and so forth. But now things have changed. Now this didn't work out for us. And so now we're just a disinterested third party, and we want them to bury the hatchet, and we encourage them to, find some kind of peaceful settlement. I think it's a way, for us, it's a face-saving way of saying, okay, yeah, we lost. And yeah, let's accept the reality. The US can't go out and say, okay, yeah, this was our proxy war. We did this. It didn't work out. Okay, you win, we lost. The US is incapable of doing that. So they got to play this game where they're just somehow never were really involved or always as a distant third party. And so that's what you see pushing there. Again, like you point out, the cessation of hostilities, they're not there yet, but I think they may be starting to drift in that direction, and it's reality that's pushing them in that direction.
Yeah, your point is well taken, and that is this. The reality that you're talking about is this. What's happening on the battlefield? I keep saying like this, there's only one way to win a war, and that's to win a war. You know what I mean? And the Russians understand there's only one way to win a war, and that is you defeat your enemy on the battlefield. That, war is about defeating your enemy on the battlefield. And either, and President Putin, apparently, early in the conflict, it was reported anyway, that he had a phone call with Macron, and he said, we will achieve our goals either through diplomacy or force of arms. And recently, again, in a statement, he said, look, one way or the other for us. Either you guys are going to negotiate what we want, or we're going to take it, even through force of arms. That's where we are. That's what we've told you. The Russians, you have to say this, have been remarkably consistent. And when they say root cause, it implies you got to come back to reality. Root cause is NATO expansion. And if we're going to get to the root cause, we always, at some point, we got to get to NATO expansion, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's probably the number one cause of this war, NATO expansion. And so you can't just talk about a cessation of hostilities, a ceasefire, without settling that problem first, because the root cause is still there. That means the war is going to reunite. It's going to reignite, I should say. It's going to continue. You haven't really ended the war. You just let the other side have a chance to rearm. Yeah, so there's no question about it. Yeah, what you're saying about the Russians being consistent, I'm really struck by that. I mean, it's just that, again, Putin, Lavrov, Peskov, all these people again and again have laid it out in very clear language, very consistently. They've spelled I guess, you can go back to June of 2024 when they just, they made their new requirements clear. And it was actually just um, a further development of what they had said earlier at the beginning of the conflict. That's why we call it Istanbul Plus. It's Istanbul, but things had happened on the battlefield. 2 years had gone by, so there's a little bit added to it. But then, ever since then, they've said it again and again and again. We know exactly what the Russians want. We knew what they wanted before this conflict broke out. This is silly notion that, we don't know what's going on in Putin's mind. He's just a madman. There's nobody that is just more of an open book when it comes to these things. He's just been saying these things in many cases, for years. And then meanwhile, on our side, I don't know what our policy, our strategy is from day to day, again, with our famously fickle president, Donald Trump. You just don't know. Sometimes within the same day, you get contradictory statements. But it seems anyway, at the current time, we are drifting towards reality. Maybe we should say being pushed by reality to start to recognize that, hey, maybe we've got to settle this. I think we're still a long ways from doing it.
Well, yeah, I agree. What do you think of my thoughts when I see the U.S. drifting towards reality and people thought they know? Well, there's no way they ever could. And you see people who saying things you didn't think about this. The U.S. knows how to lose wars. People are like, oh my God, if we lose one, like, we've been pretty good at losing wars. We have learned, like, it's almost like we have a system. We declare victory, whoever the puppet leader is, Afghanistan, wherever he heads for the tarmac, there's bags of money falling out of the back of the truck as he climbs on, and the puppet goes off to the UAE or wherever the heck he's going to go. Whether it's Bagram Air Base, Kabul, Shanghai, there's people dangling off of helicopters, C-130s, they're flopping off. I mean, we have a system that works pretty good if you think about it. So it may not be pretty, but we've learned to deal, this is this is the way we, I guess, emotionally deal with the last war that we lost. So I think the Americans will be okay losing. A lot of people think they can't. I think they're darn good at losing wars. And
well, in the end, they've had to accept those realities. They accepted it in Vietnam. They accepted it in Afghanistan. They started it off, with negotiations in both places, with, just ridiculous demands. They refused to listen to the demands of the other side. It completely ignored them, insisted that, the winning side, the side that was winning at the time, had to make huge concessions. But over time, they decided hey, that didn't work. Yeah, let's just give them what they want and get the hell out of here. Right. And that's what happened in Vietnam. That's what happened in Afghanistan. And I think that's maybe what we're seeing happening here in Ukraine. It's just that, why did Trump make this latest 180? We've seen him do many 180s, but he apparently had reached some kind of understanding with Putin, and there wasn't going to be a ceasefire. He had to have a settlement. And then he started going off, completely on the other side. I guess he had played a round of golf with General Kellogg or his friend from South Carolina or something. And so then he was just spouting the Ukrainian line and slapped sanctions on them, was threatening more sanctions. And then now we're back to where we are. And I think it's just like somebody got through to him and said, hey, we're going to have ourselves a Kabul or a Saigon on our hands. It's actually pretty bad. What Zelensky told you was a load of bull feces here, and you gotta so here, let's say you don't want that, do you? And then Trump, he understands that clearly. He doesn't want that. He remembers how he really stuck it to Biden. Remember during at the end of during his Biden's term, because that was a huge disaster. Kabul looked really, really bad, right? And we just want to avoid that. We want to work something out where we're out of there completely before that happens. And so I think that's what he's trying to do. And he's going at it, he just, like always, they can't fully accept the reality at first, but in time they might, I hope so. That's, you never can be sure with our, with our leadership here, but maybe they will. Maybe they'll have enough sense to actually, sign on the dotted line and just get out and declare victory on the way out.
Well, let's see what they say about their partners in Europe, first of all, Trump hates them. He hates Macron. He despises Mertz. He abhors, Starmer. We can keep going with words stronger than hate. But what are words stronger than hate for $200, Alex? Zelensky. There's not even a word for how he feels about Zelensky. At any rate, so let's read what this new national strategy says. Oh boy, I'm excited. The Trump administration finds itself at odds with European officials. I love that. Who hold unrealistic expectations for the war, perched in unstable minority governments, many of which trample on basic principles of democracy to suppress opposition. A large European majority wants peace, yet that desire is not translated in policy, in large measure because those governments' subversion of democratic processes. Man, well, he just
Well, this is, I've never felt myself being more MAGA than right now. I mean, that actually made sense. It really did. That's almost something that I could have written or you could have written, I think. I mean, really, that is the reality there. So, yeah, more power to them for saying that.
Yeah, it goes to show, there is a rift. They really don't like those people. But the points they make, I mean, that's the thing about it. When you listen to the Europeans, you'll hear them say 100 things, and 101 of if they say 100 things, 101 of them are pure bull crap and madness. And you'll say, what are they talking about? If you listen to the Trump people say 5 things, one of them is very sensible. The other 4, you're like, oh God, this old same crap. But one of them you look at and you'll say, yeah, I'm surprised that the U.S. government could say something like that. And that's the difference, I think. There is, the imperialists and all the things that we hate, sure. But there is at least an element of reality somewhere.
No, that's been true of Trump, I think, from the beginning. It's just that every once in a while he'll say something which just makes you sit up and say, wait a second, this guy actually said this? This guy is different. This is, for a moment, it's just like there's this shaft of light and, there's the truth has been exposed. And you think, wow, I remember being very excited, like way back in, what was it, 2016, or when he condemned, the Iraq war in front of all these supposed to be, diehard Republicans. And everybody was convinced that he had just shot himself in the foot, or, worse, that basically his campaign was over. But it actually turned out to be popular. That made me think, this guy, maybe he's different, maybe. And then we heard a lot of these kind of statements, last year too, during the campaign. And then we get statements even now, like this, but they're just sort of, like you say, it's just like that occasional shaft of light. And then usually then somebody comes along and closes the, draws the blinds or closes the door. And then it's like, did I say that? No, I never said that. So I used to be very excited about those kind of statements and say, wow, maybe this is going to be different. I just don't think he's going to follow through on it. It's just, maybe, and maybe, it's going to be sporadic. We'll see it, but he has enough neocons around him that they are going to make sure to sabotage, whenever he gets a sensible idea in his head, which is pretty rare, but occasionally he does, they'll make sure that it's not acted upon.
They'll make sure that instead of saying a long-term peace, they say cessation of hostilities, which is specifically what the Russians have said they'll never succeed. We're going to work for specifically something that the Russians have said there's no way they'll take. Okay, that's fine. The Russians will handle. I think they got a way of addressing that. That includes artillery and drones. And they go on to say, okay, American diplomacy should continue to stand up for genuine democracy, freedom of expression, and unapologetic celebrations of European nations' individual character and history. America encourages its political allies in Europe to promote this revival spirit. And the growing influence of patriotic European parties, sounds like the AfD, doesn't it? Indeed gives cause for great optimism. Our goal, listen to this, should be to help Europe correct its current trajectory. We will need a strong Europe to help us successfully compete and to work in concert with us to prevent any adversary from dominating Europe. So they're saying, hey, we want these, the AfD, whatever, can be, adversary from dominating Europe. In other words, we want to dominate Europe and we want to keep them as vassals and nobody else.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The problem with saying that is like, I can understand having that opinion as, an individual. I'm sympathetic to these different populist movements or whatever. But as a government, you have to respect the sovereignty of other countries. Like Russia would never make a statement like that, even if Putin would think, it would be good if the off day because maybe we can negotiate something then. But he said, that's your business. Whoever wins your elections or whatever, that's, I'm not intervening in that. And that's, just an ironclad policy of Russia and of the other, of China and the other BRICS members. It's just like, we respect sovereignty. That's what we're about. And what you see here, even though I'm sympathetic actually to like what they're saying here, is that this is not respecting their sovereignty. It's insisting that certain parties need to win, other parties should lose, certain policies should be instituted. And again, that's like you say, that's kind of a declaration that, you got to accept our guidance, and not your own guidance. We're the ones who get to set the rules in your part of the world, you folks don't.
Right. It is, hey, we think that you should have democracy. And by democracy, we mean you should elect the people that we want you to elect and have the parties. Now, granted, I agree with some of the things they're saying, but they're doing some of the same darn things here. Yeah. So there's a certain contradiction in saying, hey, we got to take over TikTok so that the Zionists can make sure there's nothing in it that they don't want floating around on TikTok. Oh, by the way, you can't go after people for social media. All right, let's go over their broad policy for Europe. It says our broad policy for Europe should prioritize. I'm going to give them one at a time and get your thoughts. Number one, reestablishing conditions of stability within Europe and strategic stability with Russia.
Okay, well,
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I don't. That's pretty vague. I mean,
broad.
Yeah, strategic stability. That sounds good. That's a positive word, but it doesn't. We're not getting down to the nuts and bolts.
No. And if stability to them could mean strategic stability means we dominate everything. Oftentimes with neocons, when they say stability, that's what they mean. Right. Enabling Europe to stand on its own feet and operate as a group of aligned sovereign nations, including by taking primary responsibility for its own defense without being dominated by any adversarial power. So it sounds like you're saying you want these lunatics to have a strong army. They're the last 3 people in the world that need to have any army, much less a strong one.
Yeah, well, good point. I mean, early on, you're talking about their hostility with Russia, need to make peace with it. These people, so I think your point is well taken. It's just like, why arm the crazies, right? If that's the way it is. I suppose their idea is that we get rid of the crazies, parties that we like, they take power, and then they can arm themselves. But that's not the way it is.
And buy lots of our weapons. We want you to take responsibility for your own defense. What's that mean? That means buy lots of our weapons. That's the way I read that also.
Yeah. Well, that's what's happening, in fact, right now. That's what they're doing. That's the new arrangement, right? Is they're buying our weapons. And, that's great for us, I suppose, or at least for not really for us, but for
the MIC. Huh?
Yeah. Exactly, for the MIC. And the MIC loves it.
Cultivating resistance to Europe's current trajectory within European nations. Well, you know what that means. That means that they hate the cultural neoliberals, the trans stuff and all of that stuff. And so that's resistance to their current trajectory. Interesting that the United States would say that's part of our, strategic plan. You notice this? We're writing down our national security strategy. What is it? Europe has to do what we want.
Yeah, again, that's exactly. There's a lack of respect for their sovereignty. It just said that shouldn't be a strategy. That's the strategy of a country that has some sort of revolutionary ideology. It's like under Mao Zedong, we're going to support, our Maoists everywhere. We're going to carry out the revolution or whatever. That's an ideological kind of framework that they're talking about right now. That's not. Again, a recipe for cooperation and peaceful coexistence, which is say, okay, you have your way of doing things, I have my way of doing things, I'll respect what you do, but rather no, we are going to actually intervene. That's what they're suggesting or implying right there, is that we're going to intervene and we're going to support the movements that we like and try to suppress the movements that we dislike. Now, I'm kind of sympathetic to what they're talking about, I'll be honest with you, but that's just, you can't do that as a national strategy. And I am a firm believer in sovereignty and multipolarity, and this runs against it. It's no longer are we talking about, let's say, just Western hegemony. This is just pure American hegemony, and the American, there's certain aspects of it under Trump that, like, occasionally he does make sense, but there are a lot of other ugly aspects to it, which we can get to later.
Building up the healthy nations of Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe through commercial ties, weapon sales, political collaboration, and cultural and educational exchanges. Building up the healthy nations. First of all, they ain't healthy at all. In fact, some of the Baltic nations have recently come to the EU saying we need money. I don't know if you've been following that, but they've gone to the EU and say, oh, by the way, we were happy. We cut off all of our borders with Russia. We cut off doing business with Russia, but we're going broke now because we don't have all that money flowing in from the doing business with Russia. So give us money, and oh, by the way, we're not, after 2027, no more oil or gas from Russia. I guess that means it'll just come from India. That maybe it was once in Russia, but not really, according to this. But so they're saying, we're going to make them buy our stuff because he also is opening European markets to U.S. goods and services, right? So you're saying we're going to open it, we're going to sell them stuff, we're going to cut them off from buying from anyone else, and then that's going to make them healthier. Oh yeah, that sounds great.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's just a continuation of the current, insane policy that's just obviously not working. It's a combination of deprive yourself of all that cheap energy, and increase your defense budgets, increase defense spending, and trade with Russia. Again, in the case of the Baltics, that's got to be a huge part of their economy. Yeah, well, no wonder they're asking for money, right? Now, what was it? He said there was this was focused on Eastern and Southern European countries.
Building up the healthy nations of Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe. They don't say anything about Western.
Yeah, Northern and Western. They're missing from there. So that's maybe goes back to like George W. Bush, and they remember it was like the
New Europe versus Old Europe.
Right. And I don't know.
Let's face it. They hate France and Germany, and they consider Western. Everybody considers them France and Germany, but I guess they're adding Spain and Italy. Like, screw all you guys, man. But Eastern Europe is complete lunatics.
Yeah, right. So I don't know. That's kind of a strange prejudice there. The healthy nations of Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe. Interesting.
The thing is, it's so much lies. Africa, for far too long, American policy has focused on providing and later on spreading illiberal ideology. Well, that's an absolute lie. Because when the people vote in their own, their vote, no matter what it is, democracy, liberal ideology, the only thing they focused on is stealing all of their stuff. And when they vote in somebody that won't allow them, that's not a puppet, they kill them and put in a drug deal in puppet like they have in Nigeria. So, that's the other part of this thing is it's couched in this rhetoric of the United States as some philanthropic hegemon that for so long, Peter, we've been trying to do so much good around the world, and now we just can't do good so much anymore.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's something that I kind of appreciate about the Trump administration. It's just that, again, the pretense is gone. The pretense has been there for a long time that, we were the philanthropic nation. It was that we were driven by concern for human rights. And that's just been, just total bullcrap for a long, long time. We've been very selective about our concern for human rights. In the end, it's always come down to crude geopolitics. Let's be honest. But who was it that was saying? I think maybe it was Jim Jatras or somebody like that who said that he was wondering why um, when he first began, working in the State Department in Eastern Europe, and then, he was observing these contradictions, like, we weren't concerned about human rights, or shouldn't we be concerned about human rights? And he was pulled off to the side and he was told flat out, it's like, you don't understand. The human rights is something that we use. It's a weapon, basically. Right. And we talk about it when it serves our interests. We bring it up. If we want to bring down, we become suddenly concerned about human rights when a country is crossing us geopolitically. And then if a country is very much on our side and supportive of our policies, has tightly allied itself with us, we're not concerned about human rights. I mean, this is what he found out, and anybody who's really been paying attention to what's been going on for the last several decades, notices this is true. So it's kind of refreshing in one way to say, oh yeah, we don't care about human rights, because it's the truth. That's one thing. It's like the mask has been torn away. That's it's ugly. I'm not celebrating it, but it does have the effect of, there a certain amount of deception was achieved. There are a lot of people who were confused about what the U.S. really stood for. I think much less so now under Trump, because he's just so open about what he does.
Here's a perfect example, and I know you're going to recall this. Leaked memo school. Remember that? Rex Tillerson on human rights?
Yes.
3 months into his tenure as Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson alarmed veteran diplomats with remarks that sounded like a potential shift in American foreign policy. The U.S., he said, should be careful not to let values like human rights create obstacles to the pursuit of its interest, right? And they said Brian Hook, a real sociopath, wrote up apparently a memo that it says, the U.S. should use human rights as a club against its adversaries like Iran, China, and North Korea, while giving a pass to repressive allies like the Philippines, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. And all that was simple as this. Right. The neocons weaponize everything.
Yeah.
If there's everything, it's like a Jackie Chan movie. Jackie Chan walks in, and if there's like somebody's playing pool, he throws the pool balls at somebody. Then he runs into the next room. There's pictures on the wall. He grabs them and throws them in. Then he finds a mop, somebody's mopping. He takes the mop handle, hits you over the head. Anything around him is going to be used as a weapon. That's the neocons.
Right. Well, it's also, you could say that it's probably a so-called rules-based international order, right? We make the rules, we and we give the orders. And it's really true. It's just like, international law is something that's written down. It's institutionalized in the United Nations. Yeah, often it's violated, but people understand what it is. Nobody knows what these rules are because we get to just decide. And if anything that is selectively enforced is not real. That's not a rule. That's not a law. That is just a weapon. And so we use human rights and democracy and all these kind of things selectively as a weapon, against whoever the adversary of the day happens to be. And that's been long true. Yeah.
The way I like to put it is this: rule of law versus arbitrary application of the law. Right. Yeah. And what we're talking about is arbitrary application of the law. But under the guise of rule, yes, we're for rule of law until such time as we're not.
Yeah, exactly.
How about here's one? Oh, you're going to love this one. We should call the Venezuelans and ask what they think of this particular phrase. Predisposition to non-interventionism. Interventionism. In the Declaration of Independence, America's founding fathers laid down a clear preference for non-interventionism in the affairs of other nations and made clear the basis. Just as all human beings possess God-given equal natural rights, all nations are entitled by the laws of nature and God to a separate and equal station with respect to one another. For a country whose interests are as numerous and diverse as ours, rigid adherence to non-interventionism is not possible. You like that? Rigid adherence to this is not possible. Yet, this predisposition should set a high bar for what constitutes a justified intervention. Isn't it interesting? In black letters in bold, they say predisposition to non-interventionism. And then they say, but we can't do that. But we'll do the best we can.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that kind of sums it up. It's just like, they have their cake and eat it too. It's just like, yeah, we can pretend to be, celebrate this principle of non-interventionism. We can celebrate human rights, but we don't need to apply that rigidly. We just apply it when we want to, right? So, that's quite absurd. If it's just
for a country whose interests are as numerous and diverse as ours, rigid adherence to non-interventionism is not possible. So let me interpret this and tell what it sounds like. We're hegemon.
Right.
Other people should do it, but once you become in charge of everything, you just can't do that anymore because you got to tell people what to do. You're the boss.
Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. So, I mean, non-interventionism doesn't mean anything if you can set it aside whenever you decide that, it's not in our interests, or it's just not what we want to do today. It's just like, I greatly respect the whole, principle of respect for human life, but I don't feel like that today. I think I'll shoot my neighbor. And then tomorrow I'll celebrate it again. It's
yes. I don't drink and I'm really opposed to alcohol unless I got a really nice brandy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now then, I'm completely opposed to alcohol. I never drink. I'm a teetotaler. But if there's a really nice brandy, then okay. Well, I can talk.
I'm not rigid about it, right?
Right. Yeah. I'm not rigid about it. Exactly. Let's see. Sovereignty and respect. This is the new national security strategy. Oh, I can't wait to read this one. Sovereignty and respect. This is going to be a good one.
Uh-huh.
The United States will unapologetically protect our own sovereignty. Well, okay. Do you have to announce that? Is that something you really have to say? You're the government. It is specifically enumerated in the Constitution. But okay, let's continue. This includes, listen to this, preventing its erosion by transnational and international organizations, attempts by foreign powers or entities to censor our discourse or curtail our citizens' free speech rights. How are foreign powers going to curtail our citizens' free speech rights?
Well, anyway, there are
lobbying and influence. I love this. Lobbying and influence operations that seek to steer our policies or involve us in foreign conflicts. I think that. Do you think that applies to AIPAC?
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. There's a huge blind spot here. Yeah, it's just certain kinds of transnational, organizations or certain kinds of foreign influence, that we won't stand for. But as I seem to recall, there's been a real push. What was it? Netanyahu said there's the eighth front in Israel's wars. It's many wars, and one of them was actually basically American information space. And so anyway, we got Israel firsters buying up this company and that company, but that's fine. I haven't heard of people protests from Donald Trump and his people, or even efforts to censor Americans, or pressure. That's what we're seeing. People being grabbed on university campuses and whatever for publishing op-eds, and but that's okay because that's a part of the fight against anti-Semitism. So. Yeah, that's one thing. It's just you go back to the support for, let's say, democratic forces or movements within Europe and free speech within Europe. Yeah, that's fine and good. Yes, I say I support those forces too, but by and large, but there's again a huge blind spot. You got to look back at home and what you're doing. It's, but again, we got to set the rules. This doesn't matter. Look the other way, you bad person.
Yeah. Well, when you read one thing that says, we got a lot of diverse interests and things like that, so we can't necessarily adhere to the principles of non-interventionism, right? We might have to intervene in other people's business. And then I read on this: the United States will chart our own course in the world and determine our own destiny, free of outside interference, with the exception of Israel, right? Yeah. But we may have to intervene. We may have to do interventionism, but nobody else is allowed to do it with us. It's hegemony. We are the bosses. Yeah. We can do what the hell we want anytime we want, change the rules, bend the rules, but you can't.
Right. Yeah, I think what the only change that we're really seeing from previous administrations is that we're going from, again, a Western-led hegemony to just purely American-led. That's the thing. That's the difference. But it's just like it's not the rules-based international order. It's it's America. It's not just these various institutions, that may include Europe and whatever. It's America. It's raw American power. That's the change, but it's still hegemony.
Okay, you ready? I think
Yeah.
this is the part that was written by what's his name, Wolfowitz.
Oh,
They reiterate the Wolfowitz doctrine
oh, really?
clearly. Here's
Uh-huh.
the Wolfowitz doctrine: balance of power. The United States cannot allow any nation to become so dominant that it could threaten our interests. Cannot allow it but to
Yeah.
say that means you have the power to stop them. Let me continue.
Right.
We will work with allies and partners such as Ukraine, and Taiwan, as a matter of fact,
And
such as Ukraine.
Japan.
We will work with allies and partners to maintain global and regional balances of power to prevent the emergence of dominant adversaries. Regional. We can't even allow a regional power to arise, right? As the United States rejects the ill-fated concept of global domination for itself. That don't sound like you're rejecting it. But let me continue. We must prevent the global and in some cases even regional domination of others. So as we reject an ill-fated concept of global domination, we got to stop anybody else from dominating regional or anything.
Right. That sounds like in other words, okay, yeah, we're against global domination. We're not globalists, but we're not going to allow there to be any kind of adversaries to our global power, which is just, in other words, yeah, we are going to pursue a strategy of globalism, of globalist hegemony, of our hegemony over the globe, I guess I should say. Yeah, we cannot have a strong Russia opposed to us, a strong China, a strong Iran in the Middle East, whatever. We can't tolerate any of these things because why? That would constrain our power. That would infringe upon our special status again as the global hegemon.
This does not mean wasting blood and treasure to curtail the influence of the world's great and middle powers. But that's exactly what it means. But let me continue.
Yeah.
The outsized influence of larger, richer, and stronger nations is a timeless truth of international relations. That's true.
Mm-hmm.
This reality sometimes entails working with partners to, you're going to love this, thwart ambitions that threaten our joint interest, right? So we've got, we must prevent the global and in some cases even regional domination of others. We will work with allies and partners to maintain global and regional balances of power to prevent the emergence of dominant adversaries. The United States cannot allow any nation to become so dominant that it could threaten our interest. You can't even threaten our interest. It's simply saying this: everybody in the world must acquiesce to what we do, to our quote interest, whatever we say they are. We don't have to find interest because they change from day to day. The interest is this: you'll do what the hell you're told, or else.
Right. Yeah. I think, for example, we've had Trump going after the BRICS in a big way. He's threatening that he's going to slap tariffs on all of them. Why? Because they're talking about opposing us. They're talking about, maybe developing other financial systems, other currencies, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I guess that would be an example that goes against our interests. So, we got to slap them down, but this is, again, the behavior and the thinking of a hegemon. There's really no change, right.
Good. Fairness.
No,
from military alliances to trade relations and beyond. Now, I love this fairness, right? The United States will insist on being treated fairly by other countries. Well, that's interesting. I didn't know fairness when you got to treat us fair. However, if we got to intervene in your country, we got to make sure that you don't become too dominant. We got to make sure that nobody can be powerful enough to threaten us. But you better treat us fair. So fairness goes in one direction.
Right. Yeah, I think it's just fairness as it's understood in the mind of Donald Trump or, whoever's in charge at the time. That's it. That's it. Yeah, we're in favor of fairness. We're in favor of all these things. And we get to decide when these things apply. I guess that's his fairness, like all the tariffs, that he slapped on. It's all about fairness in his mind. They're selling us too much stuff. So they need to be punished because that's not fair.
Finally, because economic security is fundamental, we'll look to further strengthen the American economy. Balanced trade. Well, we know what that's about. Tariffs, right?
Right.
Securing access to critical supply chains and materials. We know that's about what that's about. China has its over barrel. We know what that's about when it comes to rare earth. So that had to be in there. Reindustrialization. Here's the problem. Let's bring this up. The future belongs to maker. The United States will reindustrialize the economy. That is contradictory in the context of AIing everything. Okay.
Wow.
So if I build this gigantic factory in Michigan, okay, but the factory is full of robots and it's run by AI. So
Yeah.
reindustrialization does not imply more jobs and prosperity. It did at one point. We thought of people standing in line and it comes to you on the assembly line and you put this screw in, it goes to the next guy, he bends it that way and around it goes and everybody gets a nice job with the retirement and all that stuff like they did in my dad's day. Now it means AI runs a factory 24 hours a day. There's no lights on. It's dark. They don't need them because it's all robots. So reindustrialization does not imply that you're going to reindustrialize the economy. It simply means you're going to industrialize the process, the means, the manners of production.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, I'd have to agree that this is a very important issue. And that, America needs to find a way to reindustrialize. But you're right to point out that, tariffs aren't going to be, especially tariffs that are applied in this very haphazard manner, and inconsistent. There's no, who knows how long they're going to be in effect. Will they go with the next, if tariffs that were applied in a systematic manner, after debate within Congress, as a part of a new industrial policy, that could be an ingredient, let's just say one part of a general strategy to reindustrialize. And I see how it could be helpful. But, you point out there's a whole problem of AI and automation that if you don't look at that part of the problem, you really haven't solved anything. You're right. If we get factories that are run by robots and our people are still unemployed, what have we done? We probably made some people like the robot builders rich within the US, and that's what's going to happen. There's just a lack of, I think, a really carefully thought out strategy to deal with this. I understand the concern, it's right to be concerned about, we should be focused on it, but we got to attack this problem from many, many different directions. And the tariff route is not sufficient, especially, the way that it's being done right now.
It's a refusal to address the contradictions in your basic plan for your country. But let's continue. We're going over the new national security strategy. You're going to love this one. It's what I believe is at the heart of the Western problems, economic and otherwise. Preserving and growing America's financial sector dominance.
Right.
We got to keep Wall Street. Wall Street's got to eat. Okay. The United States boasts the world's leading financial and capital markets, which are pillars of American influence that afford policymakers significant leverage and tools to advance America's national security priorities. Think about that. Let me read this to you again. The United States boasts the leading financial and capital markets, okay, which are pillars of American influence. Well, wait a minute. I didn't know that's what they were for. And afford policymakers significant leverage and tools to advance America's national security priorities. Oh, so we've got to keep Wall Street strong so that we can use them as leverage to tariff people and sanction people the hell out of business till they give us what we want.
Right. Well, there's a self-contradiction here, because the thing is, what makes like a financial hub, or just this financial infrastructure and power, possible in a country, and it allows it to grow and to prosper and to actually attract capital from around the world, is the let's say the principled rejection of what they're just saying, is saying not using it as a weapon, not using it for influence, not using it to attain our objectives. Again, it's just like if you have if you've got let's say you've got a bunch of cash under your bed and you decided finally, I need to put this in a bank, somebody's going to come in and steal this or whatever. If you got one bank that is talking about how we use, our bank is really interested in influencing and pursuing these different policies, they put all these things first, and you realize that, wait a second, this is if they don't like me, again, they might just come after my money. I'm going to keep that money back under the mattress, right? I mean, that's what it is. And so this is self-contradicting. And because of this, because of our weaponization of the dollar and of our actually domination of these financial systems like the SWIFT system, we have weakened ourselves. We used it in the way that they're just describing it, to achieve geopolitical objectives. And because we've done that, we have actually weakened our financial sector. And so there's absolutely no awareness here of the problem. They're going to continue going down that road.
I would say this. Here's what that sentence says. BRICS, get going. BRICS, you better get going. BRICS, you better build fast, because our plan is to continue to use money as a weapon. Our leadership cannot be taken for granted. Preserving and growing our dominance entails leveraging our dynamic free market system works so well, and our leadership in digital finance and innovation to ensure that our markets continue to be the most dynamic, liquid, and secure, and remain the envy of the world. I don't think China envies our markets, and I don't think Russia does either. And so it's like we got to continue. So there's this narcissistic self-talk. Right. The narcissist guy who walks in the bar and he says to himself, I'm the most handsome guy in here. All the women want me. All the ladies are the supermodels just dying to ask me. And he walks in there and he can't get a date, because that's not really the truth. But he's telling himself constantly how handsome and tough, I'm cool. I'm the man. You know what I mean? And all that stuff. But that's what it is. And the people are looking at him like, dude, you're old and fat and bald. And maybe one day, years ago, you were a good-looking young guy and you could get the babes. Those days are gone, pal. You're like 73 years old and you're done. Right. And as far as, go home, go fishing, enjoy your life. But the days of going to the bar and dating the supermodels are way behind you.
Right.
And he's like, no, I'm still a good-looking guy. Look at me. I can get the supermodels and all that stuff. That's what it sounds like to me. They haven't grasped that them days are gone.
Yeah, you're right. I think that's true on many different levels. It's not just, finance. It's all around. Military, it's soft power. You don't understand. It's just a refusal to recognize that the world has moved on. And we're still living in this unipolar moment when there was no opposition. And we were the handsomest guy in the bar. It's past. You just got to wake up to it. You see, except for these occasional kind of flashes of realism, you just don't see that. And it's true of Donald Trump. He's constantly boasting about how America's the most awesome place on the planet. That's a big part of what he's about. But it's not just him. It's really it's the establishment. It's the whole Western establishment. That's the mental space that they inhabit.
And here's another one: Western Hemisphere. After years of neglect, I love this, the United States will reassert and enforce the Monroe Doctrine to restore American preeminence in the Western Hemisphere, to protect our homeland and our access to key geographies, and by geographies, they mean natural resources of other people's countries throughout the region. We will deny non-hemispheric competitors the ability to position forces or other threatening capabilities, or to own or control strategically vital assets in our hemisphere. So, we're going to sail ships through the Taiwan Strait all day long. We're going to have bases in Finland and all around everywhere in the world. But we will, quote, we will deny non-hemispheric competitors the ability to position forces or other threatening capabilities, or to own strategically, such as, I don't know, our forces in Ukraine, for instance. Would that be an example of non-hemispheric competitors? Of positioning strategic forces in somebody else's area.
Right. The hypocrisy is just astounding. I mean, it's just off the charts here. But it's actually long been true. You can go even all the way back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, because that was about the Monroe Doctrine, right? You say this is a foreign power and that they're going to be installing these missiles on an island, off our coast. This is something we cannot tolerate. This is against our strategic doctrine. Now, what they didn't tell the American people, and what we didn't learn until like decades later, is that they had installed their own missiles in Turkey pointed at the Soviet Union. And this was a response by the Soviet Union to
Yes.
that, right, that very aggressive act. We wouldn't, so it's kind of a Monroe doctrine for me, but not for thee, and it's only gotten worse over the years. So yeah, you talk about Ukraine, that's just the obvious thing is this is, the Russians, when the years leading up to the launch of the SMO in 2022, were just shouting from the rooftops, says, hey, look, we can't tolerate this. You're bringing, you're positioning these forces right up against our borders. This is a real threat. Don't you understand? You have a Monroe Doctrine, right? You got to understand that we also have concerns about our own security. No, we can't talk about that. It's just, we can have a Monroe Doctrine, but not you.
The National Security Council will immediately begin a robust interagency process to task agencies supported by our intelligence community's analytical arm to identify strategic points and resources in the Western Hemisphere with a view to their protection and joint development with regional partners. Wait a minute. Don't the countries that actually own those resources get a say? So we're saying there's resources in our hemisphere and we're going to figure out how to utilize them. But the countries that own them, they don't get a say. I think that's what's going on with Venezuela right now.
Yeah, right. I think there's something like there's even more explicit language later on. We get to the Trump corollary. Maybe we're getting to that. The Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. And the Monroe Doctrine actually, makes a certain amount of sense. You just say, we don't want foreign powers, moving into our sphere. Just like the Russians say, we don't want you, parked right there in Ukraine, right across our border from it, and pointing missiles at us. But the Trump corollary goes beyond that. And it says, basically, it becomes a very crude and kind of a caricature of the Monroe Doctrine. It says that this is our part of the world and we have a right to intervene anywhere. We're not going to accept the constraints of any institution or nation. And that's what we're seeing playing out in Venezuela right now. Yeah, without a doubt.
The stuff I'm reading now is under that heading. The Trump corollary. This is
okay. Yeah, that's what I thought we were getting there. Yeah, right.
Yeah. As soon as it says it's under the Trump corollary, after years of neglect, the United States, that's where it starts. But you go on and on. And one of the things they say is basically a readjustment of our global military presence to address urgent threats in our hemisphere. So I think part of it is this. They're planning on taking troops and stuff like that out of Europe. Realistically.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they're talking about it. Yeah.
And that has to do with, we're going to sell stuff to Europe. We're going to build up the strength of Europe, even though they're lunatics and they're ready to start a war at the drop of a hat and they're run by complete madmen and women. But that's okay. We'll just give them lots of weapons anyway. And then we'll focus on stealing everything that ain't nailed down in our hemisphere. And, we're not going to. There is no acknowledgement of sovereignty anywhere. In fact, it's the opposite. What they're saying is we do not recognize sovereignty in the Western Hemisphere at all. It's all ours.
Yeah, right. Well, and we don't really recognize it anywhere, but especially in the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah,
right. I think that's what it comes down to. And so, we see what's happening in Venezuela. It still hasn't happened, but it's just, I don't know how many people they've killed, 80, 100 people on these boats. And it's pretty ugly. It really is. I find it very shameful, and it's got to be angering a lot of Latin Americans. This is something that's going to really poison our relations with a lot of governments and a lot of, more importantly, people of the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah, the United States must be preeminent in the Western Hemisphere as a condition of our own security and prosperity. Let's see. And they get it several times. Non-hemispheric competitors have made major inroads. So they're saying we've got to stop Russia and China and Iran to some extent and other people from doing anything in anything whatsoever in our hemisphere. In a way, part of that is that retreat that people talked about, where they said the U.S. empire is going to recognize that it can't run the world and it's going to retreat to our hemisphere and try to create Fortress America. The only problem is the first part ain't so, because they're saying, okay, we're going to retreat to the United States, to our region, and control our region, but we're still going to dominate the rest of the world.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think so. I think really, maybe when we look back on this decades from now, if we're still, we're still here, we're going to see, though, maybe the beginnings of a actual retreat. I think, because I think the reality is pushing them in that direction, and it's coming out in this way. They're not admitting it, just like they're talking about, Ukraine. They're not saying, okay, yeah, we lost this proxy war. We're pretending that we're, again, impartial third party, and then and in this case, you say, well, we're not going to call it a retreat. We're going to put a positive spin on it. We're just going to assert our rights in this part of this half of the globe, and in the rest of the globe, yeah, you guys have got to listen to us over there too. But I think maybe we really will start to see an increasing focus on the Western Hemisphere, because it's a lot easier to pick on a country like Venezuela, at least if you don't get on the ground, if you just shoot missiles from out in the waters. Maybe that won't even be that easy. I don't know.
No,
but it has got to be easier than taking on Russia or China or Iran, for that matter.
Yeah, exactly. Well, here's what's interesting. They say we can't allow, we've got to, retreat to our area of the world. We can't allow anybody to come into our area of the world, and we've got to, make sure everything works here. But then they also earlier say we can't allow any country anywhere in the world to threaten our dominance, not even on a regional basis.
Right.
So we've got to maintain maximum dominance everywhere. We cannot even allow anyone to do it. If they try, we got to knock them down using our allies and everything, but we've got to strengthen in the area. So in a way, the argument that they were retreating to Fortress America, as though it was a recognition that we can't control the world, so we got to control our region. This is the opposite. This is saying we're still going to try to control the world, and we're going to put a lot more resources in our region. So instead of a retreat from hegemony, this is actually a dramatic expanse of hegemony.
Yeah, well, I think that's the contradiction that's embodied in Donald Trump. He talks this talk, which sometimes sounds pretty good, but when you look at it, he's starting wars here and there and everywhere. He's not really withdrawing from anywhere. Yeah, and then there's a talk about, what is it? It's just, the language is so vague. We're not talking about actually foreign powers like installing missiles, but it almost sounds like we don't want the Russians or the Chinese investing over here. You could say that's some sort of, involvement in it. But again, there's no respect for sovereignty. What if a country in Latin America wants to sign a deal with the Chinese? Do we come in and say, this is our hemisphere,
That's exactly what it says in here. Actually, when you read in here, and it says things like the United States has achieved we should we should use U.S. leverage and financing and technology to induce countries to reject assistance from other countries. So we're using leverage, right? Then it goes on to say other means that we can use, including intel. So what they're saying is we'll do everything we can to induce countries to reject. So we're saying we will force you not to buy anything from anyone else but us by any means necessary, right?
Right.
Okay, but a lot of stuff we don't even make, so that's not an option. But we're going to tell you, even though we don't make it, you can't buy it from them, which means you can't have it, which means you can only remain a second, third, or fourth tier nation. What you're basically saying is if you're a nation in our hemisphere, you are not allowed to have sovereignty. You are now not allowed to have industrial advancement. You're not allowed to do anything. The things that we can't provide for you, you ain't allowed to buy them from Russia or China. If you want them from Russia and China, and you say to us, well, you guys don't make them and we can get them, or you make them, but we can get them there twice the price. No, you can't.
Right.
You just can't have them then.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also, you can see that's happening actually again on the other side of the world. Let's just take India, for example. India has long been a non-aligned nation. That's what it's foreign policy has been that for decades, and it's been a very successful foreign policy. But it's something that obviously we can't tolerate. It's not just Trump now slapping tariffs on them and then threatening them for buying, doing business with Russia and buying Russian oil. You say, no, you can't just have, we don't like the fact that you're doing business with this other country. You're going to be punished. Again, even India, a great, giant on the other side of the world. And so that the same principle, if you want to call it, or actually, it's just this bullying is obviously going to be applied in just even greater measure in the Western Hemisphere.
I love this. They say, importantly, they're talking about economically. They're just nothing. But then they say, importantly, this must be accompanied by a robust and ongoing focus on deterrence to prevent war in the Indo-Pacific. So what we're doing is we're putting in missile bases. We're building all kinds of military things. We're opening all kinds of things for war. We're setting everything up to go to war with China in an attempt to prevent war.
Yeah, right. Well, what can I say? They see how well did that attempt work in Ukraine,
Exactly. Let's see. Invest in research. Well, I guess we've covered everything. The last thing I'll say is one thing is obvious, and that is the United States are saying they're rebuilding their economy. What they mean is this: we're going to look at our economy. We're going to find the parts of our economy that will work for world dominance. We need the military-industrial complex, we need technology, and we need banks. Those three things will help us to dominate the world. Those are the parts of our economy we're going to build and nothing else. That's not a recipe for building economy. That's a recipe for nothing else. Our whole strategy, all of our money, screw the people, screw America first, screw the working class. The only thing we're trying to do here is maintain world dominance, and we're only going to focus on rebuilding our parts of the economy: technology, the military-industrial complex, and banking, the things that allow us to dominate the economy. But last time I checked, speculative capital is what's wiping us out.
Yeah, right. No, I agree. I mean, that's what I think a lot of well-intentioned mega people are starting to discover and are quite upset about. Hopefully more of them will wake up to it, and we'll have a real rebellion on our hands. And but yeah, that's the current administration, not so different from past administrations. It comes down to it. It's all about American hegemony, and screw the rest.
Peter Erickson, he is a co-host on Conversations Among the Ruins, one of my favorite channels. Make sure you don't miss anything that comes from Conversations Amongst the Ruins. Him and his son Charlie, they do a great job of educating us and of talking about the very, very important issues. Everybody, I want a big thank you as always to my Patreon people. If you can afford being a Patreon member, I appreciate it. You can afford through PayPal, buy me a coffee, or any of those other ways. Certainly appreciate those who can contribute. And if you can't, oh, by the way, my P.O. box, if you want to mail anything to the P.O. box, no, not anything. Anthrax might be a problem, but that usually comes from Fort Detrick. So if I see something said Fort Detrick, I'm going to say, not opening that one. So thanks a lot, everybody. The most important thing you can do is share this on all your social media platforms. We're out.